The search for my 6-year-old son was officially ended. "He's gone," the sheriff told me. My wife said it was my fault and walked out. I returned to the woods one final time and discovered his favorite toy truck. When I picked it up, a tiny folded note slipped from the driver's seat. In his shaky crayon writing, it said, "Help me, Daddy." I froze as I read. What came next? Sound of a tense, low hum, then a sudden, sharp crack, like a branch breaking in silence. You know that gut-wrenching feeling? The one where your entire world shatters in an instant? Mine did, the day my son vanished without a trace. But the real nightmare, the true betrayal, that began when I looked into the eyes of the woman I loved and realized she was hiding a secret darker than anything I could have ever imagined. Chapter 1. The vanishing I used to pride myself on control. Leon Bell, that was me. 38 years old, self-made man, built a construction empire from nothing, turning abandoned lots into luxury homes. I'd clawed my way up, always remembering the hunger that used to gnaw at my stomach as a kid. Control was my religion. But then my 6-year-old son, Kenny, disappeared. Just like that. One Tuesday morning. He was playing in our backyard, our sprawling ranch home. Dixie, my wife of 8 years, swore she'd only stepped inside for 5 minutes to answer a call. When she came back out, Kenny was gone. No sign of a struggle. No witnesses. Just his abandoned sandbox toys. And a gate someone had left wide open. My first instinct? To tear this town apart, board by board, until I found my boy. I organized search parties, hired private investigators, put up a $50,000 reward. For 3 weeks, I barely slept, combing every inch of the dense woods around Pine Ridge, screaming Kenny's name until my voice was raw, until it bled. Sheriff Douglas Clay, a lazy man who seemed more interested in his coffee breaks than finding a missing child, just shrugged. "These things happen, Leon," he'd said with infuriating calm. "Kids wander off. Sometimes they come back on their own." But I knew Kenny. He wasn't a wanderer. My son was cautious, almost anxious by nature, a trait he'd inherited from my own childhood, dodging my alcoholic father's fists. Kenny wouldn't have left that yard willingly. Not ever. As days bled into weeks, I started noticing things about Dixie. Things that made my gut churn with a terrible suspicion. She was always so frantic about Kenny, even a small scrape on his knee. But now, she seemed oddly composed. She'd spend hours on mysterious phone calls, speaking in hushed tones, hanging up the second I walked into the room. "Who was that?" I'd ask. "Just my sister, Claire," she'd reply. But I called Claire myself. She hadn't spoken to Dixie in weeks. The breaking point? I caught her. Dixie. Secretly meeting with Gabriel Potter, a smooth-talking real estate agent who'd been sniffing around my business for months, trying to convince me to sell prime development land for pennies. I followed her to a diner on the outskirts of town. Watched through the window as Gabriel held her hand across the table. Both of them laughing. While my son was missing. That night, I confronted her. "How long?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Dixie's face went white. "How long?" "What?" "How long have you been sleeping with Gabriel Potter while our son is missing?" The slap came hard and fast. But I caught her wrist before she could pull away. My grip was like a vice. "Don't you ever," I said, barely above a whisper, "lie to me again." But instead of breaking down, instead of begging for forgiveness, Dixie's expression hardened. A coldness I'd never seen before. "You want the truth, Leon?" she sneered. "Kenny's gone. And he's not coming back. The sooner you accept that, the sooner we can move on with our lives." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just the callousness, but the certainty in her voice. As if she knew something I didn't. Chapter 2. The sheriff's decision. 3 days after that horrific confrontation, Sheriff Clay officially called off the search. "I'm sorry, Leon," he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes as we stood in his cramped office. "We've exhausted all leads. The boy's gone." I stared at the fat man behind the desk. Something dark and primal was rising in my chest. "Gone," I bit out. "That's it? That's your professional conclusion after 3 weeks?" Clay shifted uncomfortably. Look, I know this is hard to hear, but sometimes they don't make it back. Could have been an animal attack. Could have fallen in the river. Nature's got a way of hiding things. Bullshit. My voice was steel. My son didn't just vanish into thin air. Someone took him. You got any evidence of that? Any witnesses? Any ransom demands? Clay's tone grew defensive. Because all we got is a missing kid and a lot of theories. I studied his face. The nervous tick in his left eye. The way he kept glancing at his phone. How much? I asked quietly. How much what? How much did they pay you to give up? Clay's face went red. Now you listen here, Leon. No, you listen. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a menacing whisper. I know corruption when I see it. I grew up around dirty cops and bought politicians. Someone got to you, and I'm going to find out who. That evening, I walked into my bedroom to find Dixie packing suitcases. She didn't even look up. Going somewhere? I asked. I can't do this anymore, Leon. Her voice was steady, rehearsed. Living with your obsession, your paranoia. It's destroying what's left of our family. I watched her fold clothes with mechanical precision. She was only packing her belongings. And where exactly are you planning to go? My sister's place in Denver. The lie came so smoothly. Claire lived in Seattle, not Denver. Convenient timing, I observed. Right after the sheriff gives up, Dixie finally turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes that chilled me to the bone. Not grief, not fear, relief. Kenny's gone, Leon. I've accepted it. Maybe you should, too. She left that night. Took nothing but her clothes and jewelry. No family photos. No mementos of Kenny. Nothing that connected her to the life we'd built. It was like she was erasing herself from our story. I stood in that empty house, surrounded by the echoes of my son's laughter. The last vestiges of the man I used to be crumbled away. In its place, something harder, something far more dangerous, began to take shape. The next morning, I drove back to the woods. Not to search. I had a different purpose now. If Kenny was truly gone, if my wife had abandoned me, if the system had failed me, then Leon Bell would become something else entirely. I would become the kind of man who made people pay for their betrayals. As I walked those familiar trails, my mind was already working. Cataloging names. Faces. Planning. Calculating. Gabriel Potter. Sheriff Clay. My lying wife. They thought they'd won. Thought they'd broken me. They had no idea what they'd actually created. Chapter 3. The toy truck. My transformation began with methodical precision. 2 weeks after Dixie left, I threw myself into research, treating my wife's betrayal like a construction project. Careful planning, perfect execution. I started with Gabriel Potter, 34, divorced, deeper in debt than his flashy lifestyle suggested. Discreet inquiries showed he was struggling with payments on his BMW, his downtown office. More interesting? Gabriel had moved to Pine Ridge only 8 months ago from Las Vegas, leaving a trail of failed ventures and angry creditors. But it was Gabriel's connection to Sheriff Clay that made my blood run cold. Property records showed Clay had sold a parcel of land to Gabriel for a fraction of its value just 2 months before Kenny disappeared. The same land Gabriel had been pressuring me to sell. I spent my evenings parked outside Gabriel's apartment, a rundown building that didn't match the man's expensive suits. I watched his routine, noted his habits, his visitors, his weaknesses. What I discovered painted a picture of a man desperate enough to do anything for money, including, perhaps, arranging for a child to disappear. The thought made my hands shake with rage as I gripped the steering wheel. But rage without purpose was useless. I'd learned that lesson from my father's drunken violence. I needed proof, not just suspicion. And that proof came from an unexpected source. On a gray Thursday morning, I decided to make one final trip to the woods where Kenny had vanished. Not to search. I'd given up hope of finding him alive, but to say goodbye to the boy who'd called me Daddy with such trust, such love. The forest was different now. Darker, somehow, as if the trees themselves mourned Kenny's loss. I walked the familiar trails, remembering how he'd loved exploring these woods, always eager to discover some new treasure. An interesting rock, a bird's nest, a colorful leaf. It was that memory that led me to Kenny's favorite spot, a small clearing where a massive oak tree had fallen years ago, creating a natural playground. Kenny used to pretend the trunk was a spaceship, a fort, a treasure island. I'd spent countless weekend mornings here, watching his imagination transform that log into anything his young mind could conceive. And there, partially hidden beneath a pile of autumn leaves, I found it. Kenny's red toy truck. My knees gave out. I picked up the small metal vehicle, remembering how Kenny carried it everywhere, making engine noises, creating elaborate stories about its adventures. The truck was dirty, but undamaged, as if it had been carefully placed, not dropped in a panic. As I turned it over in my trembling hands, something rattled inside. The toy had a small driver's compartment that opened, a feature Kenny loved because it let him put tiny action figures inside. My fingers fumbled with the mechanism, my vision blurred by tears I refused to shed. When the compartment finally opened, a small piece of paper fell out. I unfolded it with shaking hands, instantly recognizing my son's careful crayon handwriting. The letters, still uneven, but legible. "Help me, Daddy." The world seemed to tilt around me as I stared at that note. Kenny was alive. My son was alive. And he'd somehow managed to leave this message. But where? And how long ago? I examined the paper. The crayon marks were faded, but not completely weathered. That suggested the note hadn't been outside for the full 3 weeks Kenny had been missing. The paper itself was from a small notebook, the kind used for grocery lists or phone messages. More importantly, the truck's placement seemed deliberate. Hidden, but not buried. Positioned where only someone who knew Kenny's habits would think to look. My son had been here, in this exact spot. And he'd left this message, hoping his father would find it. Which meant someone had brought Kenny here. Possibly held him nearby. And somehow, Kenny had escaped long enough to leave this clue. My grief transformed instantly into cold, calculating fury. My son was out there. Somewhere. Probably terrified. Probably hurt. And the people responsible were living their lives as if nothing had happened. As I pocketed the note and the truck, my mind was already working. The location of the truck wasn't random. It was a message in itself. Kenny knew his father would come here eventually. My boy was smart, resourceful, just like I'd been at that age, when survival meant outthinking adults who wanted to hurt you. But Kenny was also running out of time. If he'd escaped once, his captors would be more careful now. I had to move fast. But I also had to be smart. Standing in that clearing, surrounded by the echoes of my son's laughter, I made a promise. A promise that would define everything that came next. I would find Kenny. I would bring him home. And everyone who had played a part in my son's disappearance would pay a price so brutal that their screams would echo through Pine Ridge for generations. The hunt was about to begin. Chapter 4. The web of deceit my investigation took on a new urgency. After finding Kenny's note, I converted my home office into a command center. Walls covered with maps, timelines, photographs connected by red string, like something from a detective thriller. But this wasn't fiction. This was my son's life hanging in the balance. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Ethel Knapp, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down from Gabriel Potter's apartment complex. I'd been conducting door-to-door interviews, hoping someone had noticed unusual activity. Ethel, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who spent most of her day watching the neighborhood from her front porch, remembered seeing a white van parked behind Gabriel's building multiple times over the past month. "Funny thing about that van," Ethel said, adjusting her glasses. "Had Pennsylvania plates. But the man driving it didn't look like he was from out of state. Too comfortable with the area, if you know what I mean." She described the driver. Tall, thin, graying hair, and a distinctive limp. Walked like he'd hurt his left leg bad at some point. And he was always carrying a black duffel bag when he went into that building. My pulse quickened. A man with a limp. Pennsylvania plates. It was more than I'd had to work with before. I thanked Ethel and immediately drove to Gabriel's apartment, parking where I could observe the building without being seen. For 3 days, I maintained surveillance, sleeping in my truck, living off coffee, and vending machine sandwiches. On the third night, my patience was rewarded. A white van with Pennsylvania plates pulled into the parking lot at 2:17 a.m. I watched through binoculars as a tall, thin man with an obvious limp climbed out, carrying a black duffel bag. He looked around nervously before heading toward Gabriel's building. I followed at a distance, watching him enter through a side door that Gabriel had left propped open. Voices drifted from an open window on the second floor, Gabriel's apartment. Moving closer, I positioned myself beneath the window, straining to catch fragments of the conversation above. Getting too risky. That was Gabriel's voice, tense and worried. Should have handled it different from the start. The stranger's voice was gravelly, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. The kid's note. If Belle finds, my blood turned to ice. They were talking about Kenny, about the note, which meant they knew Kenny had escaped, at least temporarily. Move him again tonight. My mind raced. They were planning to move Kenny tonight. I had to act fast, but I also had to be smart. Bursting in now might get Kenny killed, especially if he wasn't even here. I needed to follow the van, find where they were taking my son. As quietly as possible, I retreated to my truck and waited. An hour later, the man with the limp emerged, still carrying the duffel bag, but walking with more urgency. Gabriel followed him to the van, and I could see them having an intense conversation before Gabriel handed over what looked like an envelope. The van pulled out of the parking lot, and I followed at a distance, keeping my headlights off whenever possible. They drove through Pine Ridge's quiet streets, then out onto the rural highways that led deeper into the forest. 20 minutes later, the van turned onto a dirt road I didn't recognize. I parked my truck and continued on foot, using my phone's dim light to navigate the rough terrain. The van's taillights disappeared around a bend, but I could hear the engine growing more distant. After walking for nearly half a mile, I saw lights ahead. A small cabin nestled in a clearing, almost invisible from the main road. The van was parked beside it. I could see movement inside through the windows. Crouching behind a fallen log, I watched as the man with the limp carried boxes from the cabin to the van. Gabriel was there, too, looking nervous, constantly checking his phone. But what made my heart race? The sight of a small shadow moving past one of the cabin's windows. A child-sized silhouette. It could only be Kenny. Every instinct screamed at me to charge that cabin, to tear through those walls and rescue my son. But the rational part of my mind, the part that had built a successful business through careful planning and calculated risks, held me back. There were at least 2 armed men in that cabin, and I had no idea what other security measures they might have. More importantly, I still didn't understand the full scope of the conspiracy against me. Gabriel and this stranger were clearly working together. But who else was involved? Sheriff Clay's suspicious behavior suggested the corruption went deeper than just a cheating wife and her lover. As I watched, Gabriel received a phone call. Even from my hiding spot, I could hear his agitated voice rising as he paced back and forth. What do you mean someone's been asking questions? No, Clay said he called off the search. Who's been talking to people in the neighborhood? My blood ran cold. Someone had reported my activities to Gabriel. Someone was feeding information to the kidnappers, keeping them one step ahead of any investigation. We need to move faster. Yes, tonight. I don't care what Belle thinks he knows. The call ended. Gabriel said something to the man with the limp that made both of them look toward the woods where I was hiding. For a terrifying moment, I thought I'd been spotted. But then they turned back to their packing with renewed urgency. I'd learned enough. Kenny was alive. And in that cabin. But they were preparing to move him. I had maybe an hour, possibly less, before my son disappeared again, perhaps permanently this time. As I carefully retreated through the woods, my mind was already formulating a plan. But this wouldn't be a simple rescue mission. Gabriel Potter and his accomplices had destroyed my family, terrorized my son, and corrupted the very system that was supposed to protect us. They thought they were dealing with a broken, desperate father. They were about to learn they'd awaken something far more dangerous. Chapter 5. The Trap. I'd learned patience in the construction business. How to wait for the right moment. How to ensure every piece was in place before making the crucial move. But with Kenny's life hanging in the balance, patience felt like torture. Still, rushing in would get my son killed. Back in my truck, I called the one person I trusted completely, Tyler Mullen. My foreman. My closest friend since childhood. Tyler had grown up on the same brutal streets as me. And like me, he'd learned that sometimes the law wasn't enough to protect the innocent. "I need your help," I said when Tyler answered. "And I need you to ask no questions until after it's over." "You found Kenny?" Tyler's voice was immediately alert. "Maybe. But I need backup. And I need it quiet." Within 30 minutes, Tyler arrived with his own truck. And a duffel bag I didn't ask about. Tyler's military background made him someone I could rely on in a crisis. His loyalty was absolute. "What's the play?" Tyler asked as I quickly briefed him. "We take the cabin. But not until I know who else is involved in this." My voice was steady, controlled. "Gabriel made a phone call. Someone's been feeding him information about my investigation. I need to know who before we move." I handed Tyler a prepaid cell phone. "I'm going to call Gabriel. Pretend I've given up. See if I can get him to reveal his contact." The call connected. "Belle?" Gabriel sounded wary. "Leon, I heard about Kenny."
"I'm sorry, man."
"That's terrible." The fake sympathy in his voice made my jaw clench. But I kept my tone defeated. "Broken." "The sheriff called off the search," I said. "Dixie left me. I wanted to apologize for what I said before. About you and her. I wasn't thinking straight." "Hey, no problem. Grief makes people say things they don't mean." "The thing is," I continued, "I'm selling the business. The house. Everything. I can't stay in Pine Ridge anymore. Too many memories." I could almost hear Gabriel's heart rate increase. "Selling? You mean the construction company? Everything?" "Everything. The land deals you were asking about? They're yours if you still want them. Whatever price you think is fair." Another pause. Then Gabriel's voice became more animated. "Leon, you don't want to make decisions like that when you're grieving. Maybe we should talk in person. Make sure you're thinking clearly." "No, I've made up my mind. But I do have one question." My voice hardened slightly. "How did you know to call off your interest in the properties at exactly the right time? It's like someone told you I'd be desperate to sell." The silence stretched long enough that I thought Gabriel might hang up. Finally, "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do. Someone's been keeping you informed about my situation. About the investigation. About when the sheriff would give up." I let the accusation hang in the air. "Leon, you're not making sense. I think you need help. I think you need to tell me who your inside man is, Gabriel. Because I'm going to find out anyway. And it'll go easier for everyone if you just tell me now." The line went dead. I immediately called Tyler. "They know I'm on to them. We move now." But as I started my truck, my phone rang. Unknown number. Leon Bell. The voice was gruff. Unfamiliar. "Yeah, you need to stop what you're doing right now." "Who is this?" "Someone who's trying to save your life. Walk away from this, Leon. Take what's left of your family and disappear." Cold fury built in my chest. "Is this the son of a bitch who took my boy?" "Your boy is already dead. Leon. Has been for weeks. What you think you found was just someone playing games with your head." The line went dead. But I was already driving toward the cabin, Tyler following in his own truck. The anonymous caller had just made a critical mistake. He'd revealed they knew about the note. About Kenny's toy truck. Only someone directly involved in the kidnapping would know those details. Which meant Kenny was still alive. As we approached the dirt road leading to the cabin, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop now or the boy dies." I showed the message to Tyler. He just nodded grimly. "Means we're close." We parked our trucks a quarter mile from the cabin and approached on foot through the dense woods. I carried a hunting rifle I'd grabbed from home. Tyler's military training made him comfortable with whatever he brought in his duffel bag. The cabin was dark, except for a single light in what appeared to be the back room. The white van was gone, but I could see fresh tire tracks indicating it had left recently. "They moved him," Tyler whispered. But as we crept closer, I spotted something that made my blood freeze. A small piece of red fabric, tied to a tree branch near the cabin's back window. Fabric that matched the shirt Kenny had been wearing the day he disappeared. It was another message from my son. I pointed out the marker to Tyler. He nodded, understanding. Kenny was still here, or had been very recently. My boy was smart enough to leave clues, brave enough to take risks to communicate with his father, which meant my son was counting on me to come. As we positioned ourselves around the cabin, I made a promise to the boy I'd raised to be strong and clever. "Daddy's coming, Kenny. And when this is over, everyone who hurt you is going to pay." Chapter 6. The rescue. The cabin was a trap, but not the kind I'd expected. As Tyler and I moved into position, I realized the building was too quiet, too still. The single light in the back room cast shadows that didn't move. No sounds of human occupation. No footsteps. No voices. No signs of life. Tyler signaled from his position near the front door, pointing to fresh footprints in the mud leading away from the cabin toward the woods. Someone had left in a hurry, probably after that phone call I'd made to Gabriel. But Kenny's red fabric marker meant my son had been here recently. I approached the back window where the fabric was tied, peering through the dusty glass into what appeared to be a small bedroom. The space was empty, except for a mattress on the floor and a small table. But there, scratched into the wooden wall near the window, were letters carved with something sharp. "Dad." My son had been in this room, had been close enough to the window to tie fabric to the tree branch outside. Kenny was alive, and he'd been trying to communicate. Tyler appeared beside me, having circled the cabin. "Building's empty," he whispered. "But there's evidence someone was living here. Food containers, sleeping bags, and—" Tyler held up a small object. "I found this by the front door." It was Kenny's other toy, a small action figure that never left his son's pocket. But wrapped around the figure's waist was a piece of paper, so small it was almost invisible. I unfolded it carefully, revealing another message in Kenny's handwriting. "Barn. Red Roof Hill." My mind raced. Red-roofed barns in the area? There were several old farms scattered throughout the hills around Pine Ridge, but only one with a distinctive red roof that could be seen from the main highway, the old Henderson place. Abandoned for over a decade. "I know where they took him," I said, pocketing the action figure. But as we prepared to leave, Tyler grabbed my arm. "Wait. Listen." In the distance, I could hear the sound of vehicles approaching on the dirt road. Multiple engines moving fast. "They're coming back," Tyler said. "Or someone else is." My mind calculated quickly. The approaching vehicles could be Gabriel and his associates returning. Or they could be law enforcement, responding to reports of suspicious activity. Either way, being found at the cabin would complicate everything. But as the sound grew closer, I recognized the distinctive rumble of Sheriff Clay's patrol car, mixed with at least 2 other vehicles. "Clay's coming," I told Tyler. "Which means Gabriel called him." Tyler checked his watch. "We can reach the Henderson farm in 20 minutes if we move now. But if we stay to face Clay, we lose Kenny." My decision was immediate. "Go. I'll handle Clay." "Leon, if Gabriel's got Clay in his pocket, then I'll deal with that too." My voice carried a cold finality that Tyler recognized from our childhood, when I'd faced down neighborhood bullies twice my size. Tyler nodded reluctantly and melted back into the woods, heading toward his truck via a route that would keep him hidden from the approaching vehicles. I positioned myself near the cabin's front door, rifle in hand, but not raised aggressively. I needed to play this carefully. Appear cooperative, while gathering information about how deep the corruption went. Sheriff Clay's patrol car emerged from the woods first, followed by 2 other vehicles, Gabriel's BMW and a black pickup truck I didn't recognize. 4 men got out. I immediately noted that Clay was wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying a shotgun. This wasn't a welfare check. This was an execution squad. "Leon Bell," Clay called out, his voice carrying artificial authority. Put down your weapon and step away from the building. I remained motionless. This is private property, Sheriff. What's your probable cause? Probable cause? Gabriel's voice was sharp with nervous energy. You've been stalking me, making threats. Clay, arrest him. But Clay seemed more cautious, studying my position and the rifle in my hands. Leon, we just want to talk. Put the gun down, and nobody gets hurt. I laughed. A sound devoid of humor. Nobody gets hurt? Sheriff, my son's been missing for over a month. My wife's run off with this piece of shit. I gestured toward Gabriel. And now you show up in the middle of the night with weapons drawn? I think someone's planning to get hurt. And it isn't any of you. The fourth man, who'd emerged from the black pickup, stepped forward. I recognized him immediately. The man with the limp from Gabriel's apartment. Kenny's kidnapper. This is taking too long, the man said, his voice carrying the same gravelly tone I'd heard from beneath Gabriel's window. We should have handled this problem weeks ago. And that's when I understood the full scope of what I was facing. This wasn't just about Gabriel wanting Dixie, or even about forcing me to sell my property. This was about eliminating the one person who wouldn't stop looking for Kenny. They'd taken my son not just to hurt me, but to drive me to exactly this moment. Isolated, desperate, and apparently helpless against a conspiracy that reached into the sheriff's department itself. But they'd made one critical error in their planning. They'd underestimated what Leon Bell was willing to do to save his son. You know what, Sheriff? I said, my voice carrying across the clearing with deadly calm. I think you're right. It is time for someone to get hurt. The night erupted in violence, but not the kind any of them had expected. Chapter 7. Blood in the Woods. My first shot took out the headlight on Clay's patrol car, plunging half the clearing into darkness and sending all four men diving for cover. I deliberately missed them. I needed information, and dead men couldn't talk. But their response told me everything about their intentions. Clay immediately opened fire with a shotgun, the blast splintering the cabin's front door inches from where I'd been standing. Gabriel scrambled behind his BMW, pulling a pistol from his jacket. The man with the limp produced a military-style rifle from the pickup truck. These weren't law enforcement tactics. This was an assassination. I rolled behind the cabin's stone foundation as bullets shattered windows above my head. My military surplus radio crackled with Tyler's voice. Leon, I can hear gunfire. What's your status? Hostiles? I responded quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos. Clay, Gabriel, and 2 others. They came here to kill me. I'm 10 minutes from the Henderson farm.
Kenny's not there.
Place is empty. My heart sank, but I forced myself to focus on immediate survival. Keep looking. I'll handle this. A voice called out from the darkness. Gabriel, trying to sound reasonable despite having just attempted murder. Leon, you're outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now, and we can work something out. My response? I put a rifle bullet through the BMW's engine block. The car died with a grinding shudder, stranding Gabriel in the open. Counteroffer, I shouted back. Tell me where my son is, and I'll let you live long enough to confess to your crimes. Clay's voice joined the negotiation, but his words revealed the depth of his corruption. Leon, you're interfering with an ongoing federal investigation. Stand down immediately. Federal investigation? I almost laughed into the night. Into what, Clay? Your side business in child trafficking. The silence that followed confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about something much darker. The man with the limp ended the conversation by opening fire with his rifle, sending a stream of bullets that forced me to crawl along the cabin's foundation toward the back of the building. As I moved, I spotted something that made my blood freeze. Fresh tire tracks leading away from the cabin's rear, not toward the road, but deeper into the woods along what looked like an old logging trail. They'd moved Kenny while I was talking to Gabriel on the phone. My son was somewhere in these woods, probably in another vehicle, getting farther away with each passing minute. My radio crackled again. Henderson Farm deserted. But I found something. Fresh tire tracks and Tyler's voice hesitated.
Leon.
There's a piece of Kenny's jacket caught on a fence post here. He was here. Within the last few hours. Which meant Kenny had been moved from the cabin to the Henderson farm, then moved again when I got too close. They were staying one step ahead, using Kenny as a lure to draw me into increasingly dangerous situations. But they'd also made a mistake by moving Kenny so frequently. They were leaving a trail. "Tyler," I whispered into the radio. "Follow the tracks from Henderson's. But be careful. This is bigger than we thought." I needed to end the standoff at the cabin quickly and get back to tracking my son. But 4 armed men had me pinned down, and they showed no interest in taking me alive. That's when I remembered the propane tank I'd spotted behind the cabin, the kind used for heating in remote locations. Sometimes the best defense was a really big distraction. I worked my way around the cabin's perimeter, staying low, using the building's bulk to shield myself from the gunfire that continued to pepper the woods around me. When I reached the propane tank, I could see it was connected to the cabin's heating system via a flexible line. One rifle shot into the tank's valve would create a massive gas leak. A second shot, properly timed, would turn the entire clearing into an inferno. I positioned myself for the shot, then called out, "Gabriel, I want to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "My life for information about Kenny. I'll come out unarmed if you tell me where my son is." I could hear the men conferring in hushed voices. Finally, Gabriel responded, "How do we know you won't try something?" "Because I'm a father who wants his son back alive, and because you've got 4 guns pointed at me." I waited, listening to their discussion. They were arguing about whether to trust me, whether they needed me alive for information, whether killing me now would solve their problems or create new ones. While they debated, I lined up my shot on the propane tank. "All right, Leon," Clay finally called out. "Come out slowly, hands visible, weapon on the ground." My response? I put a bullet directly into the tank's valve. The hissing sound of escaping gas was audible, even over the men's shouts of alarm. They had maybe 2 minutes before the gas concentration reached dangerous levels. "Change of plans," I announced loudly. "You've got 90 seconds to tell me where Kenny is before this whole clearing goes up in flames." The panic in their voices was immediate and gratifying. These men had been willing to kill a father searching for his son, but they weren't prepared to die for their conspiracy. "He's at the old mining camp," Gabriel shouted. 3 miles north of Henderson's place. "Now shut off the gas." I smiled grimly in the darkness. The old mining camp. I knew the place. Abandoned copper mine with several buildings. Remote enough that no one would hear a child's cries for help. "Thank you for your cooperation," I called back. Then I put my second bullet into the gas cloud. The explosion lit up the night sky like dawn breaking early, the fireball reaching 50 feet into the air and turning the cabin into an instant bonfire. I, shielded by the stone foundation and having covered my ears, was thrown forward by the blast, but emerged uninjured. I couldn't say the same for Gabriel Potter and his associates. As I picked myself up from the ground, I could see 3 figures stumbling away from the inferno, their clothes singed, their weapons scattered. The 4th, the man with the limp, wasn't moving at all. I retrieved my rifle and walked toward the survivors, my silhouette framed by the burning cabin behind me. "Now," I said, my voice carrying the authority of a man who just demonstrated exactly how far he was willing to go. "Let's discuss the details of this mining camp." Sheriff Clay, his uniform smoking and his face blackened with soot, looked up at me with something that might have been respect, mixed with pure terror. "Jesus Christ, Leon, you could have killed us all." My smile was as cold as a winter morning. I still can. Chapter 8. The mining camp. The old Copper Ridge mining camp squatted in the forest like a cancerous growth, its weathered buildings clustered around the dark mouth of an abandoned shaft. I approached on foot, having left my truck a mile back, making my way through the woods using paths I'd learned as a teenager when Tyler and I used to explore these mountains. Sheriff Clay's confession, at gunpoint, had revealed the basic outline of the conspiracy. Gabriel Potter and an unnamed partner had been buying up distressed properties throughout the county, using intimidation and violence when owners wouldn't sell. Kenny's kidnapping was meant to pressure me into giving up my prime development land at a fraction of its value. Clay had been paid to ensure any investigations went nowhere. But there were still pieces missing from the puzzle, and I suspected the worst revelations were yet to come. Tyler's voice crackled through the radio. I'm in position on the ridge overlooking the camp. Count 3 buildings. Main office, bunkhouse, and what looks like a workshop. Lights in the office building. Movement inside. At least 2 people, possibly more. I studied the camp through my binoculars. The office building's windows were covered with newspapers and cardboard, but I could see the flicker of artificial light through the gaps. More importantly, I could see a small window on the building's side that was uncovered. And through it, the unmistakable silhouette of someone small. Someone child-sized. Kenny, I whispered into the radio. Office building, side window. He's alive. But as I watched, I saw something that made my blood boil. An adult figure moved past the window, and I caught a glimpse of the person's face, illuminated by the interior light.
Dixie.
My wife. Kenny's mother. She was in that building. With our kidnapped son. I had to grip a tree trunk to steady myself as the full magnitude of the betrayal crashed over me. Dixie hadn't just left me for Gabriel Potter. She'd been part of the kidnapping from the beginning. She'd helped them take Kenny. Had probably been the one to leave the gate open that morning. Had played the grieving mother while knowing exactly where her son was. Tyler's voice brought me back to the present. Leon, you okay? Your vitals just spiked. I forced my voice to remain steady. Dixie's in there. She's part of this. A long pause. Then Tyler's voice carried a note of barely controlled rage. That bitch. Leon, I can take the shot from here. Clean shot through the window.
No.
My voice was steel. I want answers first. I want to know why. But even as I said it, I was beginning to understand. Dixie had always been ambitious. Always frustrated by our middle-class lifestyle. Despite my success, she'd grown up wealthy, the daughter of a family that had lost their fortune in bad investments. She'd never adjusted to being anything less than rich. The property Gabriel wanted from me was worth millions in development potential. If they could force me to sell cheap, then resell to the right buyers. Tyler, I'm going in. If shooting starts, prioritize Kenny's safety over everything else. Copy that, Leon. Tyler's voice carried the weight of our long friendship. Be careful in there. Something about this whole setup feels wrong. I was beginning to feel the same way. The camp was too exposed. Too obvious. If they'd been moving Kenny multiple times to stay ahead of my investigation, why bring him to such an isolated location? Unless this was exactly where they wanted me to come. As I crept closer to the office building, I noticed details that confirmed my growing suspicion. The other buildings showed no signs of recent use. But the office had been carefully prepared for occupation. Fresh tire tracks led to a hidden parking area behind the building. Most telling of all, the uncovered window that had allowed me to see Kenny was positioned perfectly for observation from the ridge where Tyler was. They'd left that window uncovered on purpose. They wanted me to see my son. This wasn't a trap designed to capture him. This was something worse. A trap designed to break me. My radio crackled with Tyler's urgent whisper. Vehicle approaching from the south. Black SUV, moving fast. I duck-walked to a position where I could see the access road. The SUV that emerged from the tree line was an expensive, government-issue-looking vehicle. When it stopped in front of the office building, four people got out. All carrying professional-grade weapons. Moving with military precision. But it was the fifth person who made my world tilt on its axis. Sheriff Clay emerged from the SUV, very much alive despite the explosion at the cabin, and very much in charge of the operation. The man I'd left injured and defeated was now coordinating with what appeared to be a federal task force. Tyler, I whispered, we've been played. Clay wasn't a corrupt cop working for Gabriel. Gabriel was working for Clay, which meant everything I thought I understood about the conspiracy was wrong. The property grab, the kidnapping, even Dixie's involvement. It was all part of something much larger, and far more dangerous than I'd imagined. As I watched from my hiding place, Clay spoke into a radio. Bell's here, just like you said he'd be. What's the next phase? The response came through clearly enough for me to hear. Bring him inside. It's time he learned the truth about his son. My blood turned to ice as I recognized the voice on the radio. It was my own brother, Sam Bell, who'd supposedly died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Chapter 9. The truth unveiled. The office building's interior was a study in calculated psychology. Kenny sat in a corner, unharmed, but clearly frightened. Dixie paced near a makeshift desk covered with documents. The room was lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in sharp relief. I could see immediately that my son hadn't been tortured or abused. He'd been kept as leverage. But it was the man sitting behind the desk who commanded my attention. Sam Bell, 3 years older than me, and supposedly 3 years dead, looking very much alive and very much in control. "Hello, little brother," Sam said, his voice carrying the same mixture of affection and condescension it had when we were children. "You always were too stubborn for your own good." I stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 armed men who'd escorted me inside after I'd surrendered myself in exchange for Kenny's safety. My rifle had been taken, but my mind was still working, still calculating angles and opportunities. "The funeral," I said quietly. "I buried you." There was a flag ceremony. Sam smiled. The expression didn't reach his eyes. Military intelligence has its advantages. Sometimes a man needs to die in order to live freely. "And Kenny?" My voice was barely controlled. What was this? Some kind of sick family reunion? Dixie spoke for the first time since I'd entered. Her voice defensive, but lacking any real conviction. "Leon, you have to understand." "Shut up." My command was so sharp that Dixie actually stepped backward. "I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my dead brother, who apparently kidnapped my son." Sam leaned back in his chair, studying me with the analytical gaze that had made him successful in military intelligence. "Kenny was never in any real danger. He's been fed, clothed, entertained. Hell, we even let him keep his toys." "His toys?" My voice rose. "You mean the ones he used to leave me messages? The ones he used to tell me he was alive when you wanted everyone to think he was dead?" Sam's smile widened. "You always were the smart one in the family. Yes, we allowed Kenny to leave those messages. We wanted you to find them." I felt the last pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, and the picture they formed was more horrifying than anything I'd imagined. This whole thing, the kidnapping, the investigation leading me here, it was all orchestrated. "Very good." Sam stood up, walking around the desk to face me directly. "You see, Leon, I have a problem. Several problems, actually. I've been running certain operations overseas that require funding and resources. The kind of funding that comes from real estate development in growing markets like Pine Ridge. My construction business. My property holdings. My entire life's work." "You could have just asked," I said. Sam laughed. "Could I?" The Leon Bell I knew growing up would never have willingly handed over his business to his supposedly dead brother. You'd have wanted explanations, involvement, oversight. That wasn't going to work for my situation. "So, you decided to destroy my family instead?" "I decided to motivate you." Sam's voice hardened. "See, I know you, Leon, better than anyone. You're not motivated by money or threats or rational argument.
But you're motivated by family.
By protecting the people you love." I looked at Kenny, who was watching the conversation with the wide-eyed confusion of a child trying to understand adult insanity. Then I looked at Dixie, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "How long?" I asked her. "How long have you been working with him?" Dixie's voice was barely audible. "Since before we were married." The words hit me like a physical blow. My entire marriage, my son's birth, the life I built, all of it had been orchestrated by my brother as part of some long-term manipulation. "Dixie was supposed to convince you to sell the business," Sam continued conversationally. "Move somewhere else. Start over. But you were too attached to Pine Ridge. Too stubborn about your success here. So, we had to try more aggressive methods. Like kidnapping my son." "Like borrowing your son," Sam corrected. "Temporarily. Just long enough to make you understand what really matters in life." I looked around the room, taking inventory. 2 armed guards by the door. Sheriff Clay standing near the window.
Dixie by the desk.
Sam in the center of it all. And Kenny, my 6-year-old son, who'd been used as a pawn in a game I was only now beginning to understand. There's just one problem with your plan, Sam, I said quietly. What's that? My smile was cold enough to freeze blood. You forgot what I learned growing up in the same house you did. You forgot what Dad taught us both when he used his fists to solve problems. Sam's expression changed, becoming wary. Leon, you forgot that I'm not the same scared kid who used to hide in closets when Dad came home drunk. You forgot that I spent 20 years building a business that required me to be harder than anyone else, tougher than anyone else, more ruthless than anyone else. I took a step toward my brother, and both guards raised their weapons. And you really forgot, I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper, that I would do absolutely anything to protect my son. The explosion that rocked the building came from outside. Tyler's diversionary charge. The one I'd signaled for by leaving my hat on the windowsill. In the chaos that followed, as the lights went out and armed men shouted orders in the darkness, I moved with the precision of a man who'd spent 3 weeks planning for exactly this moment. The first guard went down to a hammer blow that I'd concealed in my boot, a tool that was both weapon and symbol of the honest work Sam had tried to steal from me. The second guard fell to a move I'd learned in construction site fights, a knee to the solar plexus that left the man gasping and helpless. Sheriff Clay reached for his weapon, but Tyler's sniper rifle ended that threat with a shot through the window that dropped the corrupt sheriff permanently. Dixie screamed and reached for Kenny, but I caught her wrist in a grip that would leave bruises for weeks. Don't, I said, my voice carrying lethal promise. Don't you dare touch my son. Sam had drawn his own weapon, a military-issue pistol that he pointed at me with professional competence. You always were too emotional, little brother. That's why you never would have succeeded in my line of work. My line of work, I replied, builds things that last. Your line of work destroys families. Families? Sam laughed. Leon, you still don't understand. There never was a family. There was just you, your resources, and my need for both. The gunshot that ended Sam Bell's life came from an unexpected source. Kenny, only 6 years old, but already showing the survival instincts that ran in the Bell family bloodline, had picked up the first guard's dropped weapon and fired it with the desperate courage of a child protecting his father. As Sam fell, as the echoes of gunfire faded, as Tyler's voice called, "All clear," from outside, I knelt beside my son and pulled the boy into my arms. "It's over, Kenny," I whispered. "Daddy's here now. It's over." But as I held my son, I looked at Dixie, who was cowering against the wall, finally understanding that her elaborate deception had collapsed. And my voice carried a promise that would define the rest of their lives. For some people, I said, my words directed at my wife, but my meaning extending to anyone who had ever betrayed my family, it's just beginning. I had learned that family wasn't about blood, or marriage certificates, or legal documents. Family was about loyalty, about protection, about never abandoning the people who depended on you. Kenny was family. Everyone else was just a problem to be solved. Epilogue 6 months later, Pine Ridge had a new sheriff, Tyler Mullen. His military background and absolute integrity made him the town council's unanimous choice. The old mining camp had been converted into a memorial park for missing children, funded by the sale of certain real estate holdings that had somehow become available at very reasonable prices. Dixie Bell, she disappeared entirely. Though rumors persisted that she'd been seen in various cities throughout the country, always looking over her shoulder, always moving. Some people said she was running from federal investigators looking into her role in the conspiracy. Others whispered that she was running from something else entirely, from the kind of man who never forgot a betrayal and never forgave. I rebuilt my business stronger than ever, but I also rebuilt my life around the one principle that had never failed me, protecting the people who earned my loyalty, while ensuring that those who betrayed that trust paid a price that would serve as a lesson to others. Kenny Bell grew up understanding that the world could be dangerous, that people could be cruel, but that there would always be someone watching over him, someone who would move heaven and earth to keep him safe. And in the quiet mountains around Pine Ridge, the Bell family name carried a reputation. Spoken with respect by friends, and whispered with fear by anyone foolish enough to consider crossing them. Some lessons once learned are never forgotten. Some debts once incurred are never forgiven. And some men, once awakened to their true nature, are never again to be underestimated. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced a betrayal this deep? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.